A winter morning in North Edmonton. A dog needs walking. A man grabs the leash, steps into the back alley, and stops dead. He's staring at a human head. Police lock down the block. The scene looks like something ripped from a cartel movie, not from a Canadian city that sells itself on festivals and hockey. Within hours, one name starts bouncing between detectives, reporters, and prison phones. Boy Posse, a neo-Nazi crew born in Edmonton, suddenly on every front page in the country. But here's the thing. Ask cops, academics, or people who've run with gangs in this city, and they'll tell you that one name is never the whole story. Because in Edmonton, that head in the alley sits on top of a much bigger pyramid. Indigenous prison gangs born inside Edmonton Institution. White supremacist crews taking cues from old prairie racist networks. And above them, outlaw bikers who allegedly prefer to pull strings from the clubhouse, not the sidewalk. Tonight, we're not asking, is there gang activity in Edmonton? We're asking a harder question. Who are the 5 crews you need to understand to read the city's underworld? And what does it cost the people who live here? To understand Edmonton's gangs, you start with a map, and then you flip it on its side. On the surface, it's just neighborhoods. North side walk-ups, south side strip malls, the river valley in between. But the real map runs vertical, from back alleys up into federal cells. Edmonton sits on a crossroads, Highway 16 heading west to the coast, east across the prairies, rail lines running straight through the industrial parks, flights hopping daily to the oil sands and the north. That makes the city a distribution and recruitment hub, not just a place gangs pass through. Police talk about 3 main layers: street and prison gangs, many Indigenous-based, recruiting in facilities like Edmonton Institution and spilling onto nearby streets. Ideological crews, like white supremacist outfits, using racism as a brand for drug money, and organized crime at the top, outlaw motorcycle clubs, and other networks that allegedly move weight and cash while keeping distance from the day-to-day violence. Ask Edmonton Police Service, and they'll tell you most gang shootings are gang on gang, not random hits on the public. But if you're the neighbor whose kid can't sleep after hearing shots at 2 in the morning, that's not exactly comforting. In this episode, we're drilling down into 5 names: Red Alert, Indian Posse, Alberta Warriors, White Boy Posse, and the Hells Angels Edmonton chapter. If you're into deep, fact-driven breakdowns of cities like Edmonton, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next episode when we move to the next Canadian city. 5 different stories. One city that keeps trying to say, "That's not us," while the evidence says otherwise. Our first stop is a name that doesn't come from a neighborhood. It comes from a prison range. Red Alert. Sources trace the gang back to the late 1990s at Edmonton Institution, a maximum security penitentiary just east of the city. According to federal research, Red Alert began as an Indigenous-based group formed by young men connected to an Edmonton street crew called the Northside Boys, a way to protect themselves from recruitment by older gangs like Indian Posse and Manitoba Warriors. On paper, it's a classic prison survival story. In practice, it grows into something much bigger. Within a few years, Red Alert is popping up in police and academic reports across Alberta and British Columbia. Drug trafficking, assaults, home invasions, enforcement work for other criminals. Individual members are convicted in specific cases. Law enforcement labels the group a serious threat. By the 2010s, Red Alert is no longer just an inside name. You hear it on the street, in Edmonton neighborhoods where poverty, foster care, and intergenerational trauma collide. Former members tell researchers that for some Indigenous youth, joining Red Alert, Alberta Warriors, or similar gangs is treated almost like a family expectation. Then there's New Year's Eve, 2021. Police chase a stolen vehicle through the city. The man behind the wheel is suspected in the shooting death of a Red Alert member earlier that day. The pursuit ends when officers open fire, killing the driver. An oversight agency later says the officers' actions were justified. The gang war and the police response collide in a single, brutal 24 hours. For Red Alert, this is the pattern. 1 foot in the prison system, 1 foot on the street. Every step watched by police. If Red Alert is the newer name, Indian Posse is one of the originals. Founded in Winnipeg in the late 1980s, the gang grows out of poverty, racism, and time in juvenile and adult institutions. Within a decade, federal intelligence reports list Indian Posse as one of the most entrenched Indigenous-based street gangs in Western Canada. Soon, they're not just Winnipeg's problem. By the 2000s, the Indian Posse is showing up in Alberta, and specifically in Edmonton. Police and academic sources connect the gang to drug trafficking, intimidation, and violence in and around the city. Individual members are convicted in specific robberies, assaults, and homicides. The larger organization is described as a high-threat entity. The rivalry angle is messy. Indian Posse members have clashed with Red Alert and Alberta Warriors inside prisons over control, respect, and recruits. On the street, they've been linked to conflict with white supremacist crews and with people associated to outlaw bikers. Officially, nobody wants to admit who outranks whom. Unofficially, you hear stories. Indian Posse guys pressing smaller Edmonton dealers, Red Alert members refusing to back down, Alberta Warriors drawing their own lines. There's another tension here. For many Indigenous families, gang member might also mean cousin, son, dad, someone who grew up in foster care or in a home ripped apart by residential school trauma. Some former Indian Posse members, interviewed by researchers, say they joined young because the gang was the only group that made them feel protected, at least for a while. In Edmonton, Indian Posse is less visible as a brand than Red Alert or Boy Posse, but the name still carries weight in cells and on certain streets. If Indian Posse is the Prairie original, Alberta Warriors are the Edmonton-grown answer. Research on Aboriginal gangs describes how members of the Manitoba Warriors, a Winnipeg-based group, were sent to Edmonton Institution. Over time, they helped seed a local crew with its own identity, the Alberta Warriors. On the street and in some online gang dictionaries, Alberta Warriors is described as an Indigenous-based gang with paramilitary vibes, ranks, discipline, and a reputation for violence. Reports link members to assaults, robberies, and other serious crimes in and around Edmonton. Individuals have been convicted. The gang label itself comes from law enforcement and underworld sources, not a public press release. One case often cited in gang literature goes back to the mid-2000s. Teenagers are invited to a home in Edmonton. What starts as a hangout turns into a night of terror. Beatings, confinement, stabbings. Several people are injured. In the aftermath, some of the attackers are linked in media and gang databases to the Alberta Warriors. Courts convict specific individuals of serious offenses. Motives, including racial motives, remain a matter of dispute. In the rumor mill, Alberta Warriors are enemies of pretty much everyone. Red Alert, Indian Posse, Boy Posse, even outlaw bikers and other Indigenous gangs. On the ground, reality is more fluid. Alliances can be temporary, built around issues like who controls a house, who owes money, who disrespected whom last week. What's clear is this: for some Indigenous youth in and around Edmonton, Alberta Warriors is a name they grow up hearing as both a threat and an option. Now we circle back to the gang that opened this story, Boy Posse. Formed in the early 2000s, Boy Posse starts as a white supremacist crew rooted in Edmonton and spreading into other parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan. Law enforcement and media reports describe it as a racist, neo-Nazi-style gang, combining ideology with a very practical focus on drug money and violence. The alleyway decapitation case becomes their national calling card. In 2012, Edmonton police respond to that now infamous North Side alley, where a dog walker finds a human head. Over the following weeks, officers and reporters link the killing to a wider investigation that includes White Boy Posse members and associates. In separate but related cases in Alberta and Saskatchewan, individuals connected to the posse are charged and later convicted of second-degree murder, manslaughter, and indignity to a body. For the public, the image is simple. A terrifying new Nazi gang is taking over Western Canada. Experts push back. Criminologists and some police voices warn against moral panic. Yes, White Boy Posse is violent and dangerous, but it's also relatively small, built around a tight circle of people at the intersection of racism, addiction, and organized crime. The most accurate picture may be as a mid-level player in a larger pyramid of crime, bikers at the top, then their support crews, with White Boy Posse and other street gangs hustling near the bottom for a share of the drug trade. Still, the imagery sticks. Nazi tattoos, shaved heads, and the horror of that alley scene. And in prison, the brand can matter as much as the numbers. Posse members lining up on one side of a racial divide, Indigenous gangs on the other. In Edmonton, White Boy Posse is less visible today than at its peak, but the legacy of that violence still shapes how people talk about gangs in this city. Over all of this sits a name that's almost a brand: Hells Angels. Canada has dozens of Hells Angels charters. The Edmonton chapter is one of them. Patch-wearing bikers, clubhouses, and a long history of law enforcement attention. Police and criminal intelligence reports across the country describe the Hells Angels as a major organized crime group, with alleged involvement in drug trafficking, extortion, and weapons offenses. But Hells Angels don't usually sell dime bags on street corners. That's where the pyramid comes in. Investigators say outlaw motorcycle clubs often use support clubs and street gangs to move product and handle enforcement. Those lower-tier groups fight the turf wars, while the bikers, in theory, keep their hands cleaner. In Alberta, one of the biggest public cases was Project Al Wheels. In 2015 and 2016, a provincial task force called Alert, working with Edmonton Police and the RCMP, rolls out a series of raids tied to the Edmonton chapter. They seize more than $1 million in allegedly stolen property: trucks, trailers, ATVs. They lay charges related to stolen vehicles and firearms. Press conferences feature neatly lined up evidence and a clear message. The Hells Angels are not untouchable. But here's the twist. A couple of years later, the Crown stays proceedings against one of the key accused. No trial, no verdict. The reasons include issues like reasonable prospect of conviction, legal thresholds that are hard to meet in complex organized crime cases. So the record ends up split in two. Official record, a major project, big seizures, criminal charges, and stayed proceedings for at least one accused. Street record, they hit the Angels, but they couldn't make it stick. For crews like Red Alert, Indian Posse, Alberta Warriors, and White Boy Posse, that message travels fast. So how do these 5 gangs fit together in Edmonton's underworld? Picture that pyramid again. At the top, according to police and intelligence reports, you have outlaw motorcycle clubs like the Hells Angels. They allegedly control significant portions of the drug trade, and sometimes use puppet clubs or trusted crews to handle local business. Below that, you have street and prison gangs, Red Alert, Indian Posse, Alberta Warriors, and others. They fight for control over neighborhoods, over prison ranges, over who can sell what in which house. The lines are not clean. A Red Alert member might work with someone connected to bikers one year and fight them the next. On one side of that tier sits White Boy Posse, bringing ideology into the mix. Reports over the years suggest temporary alliances of convenience between white supremacist crews and parts of the biker world. Those alliances can shatter quickly when money or ego gets in the way. And below all of that are the people who don't get headlines: the kid running deliveries to support a habit, the girlfriend holding drugs or cash in her apartment, the neighbor who knows something's wrong but doesn't know who to call. Every line in this web is a risk of prison time, of violence, of getting pulled deeper in than you planned. If you listen only to police press conferences, It can sound like an endless war. Gangs everywhere, all the time. The numbers tell a different story. Edmonton Police Service statistics show that while gang-related shootings do spike in certain years, most of the city's crime is still not committed by gang members. Public safety officials emphasize that the average person is unlikely to be targeted at random. Talk to researchers and former gang members, and you hear something else. Life in these gangs is chaotic, unstable, and often short-lived. People bounce between groups, age out, or end up in protective custody. Some say they never considered themselves in a gang at all, just part of a crew trying to survive. The war is real, but it's smaller, more fragmented, and more tragic than the movie version. A University of Alberta study interviewed 175 current and former gang members across Western Canada. 98% said the same thing. If they could do it over, they wouldn't choose gang life. When asked why they joined, they talked about abuse, poverty, foster care, racism, the need to belong. When asked why they stayed, they talked about fear. In Edmonton, police and community groups focus heavily on prevention, working with schools, families, and neighborhoods to spot the warning signs early. Formal exit programs are thinner on the ground, but there are people quietly doing the work. Social workers, elders, former gang members who now spend their time telling kids, "Don't make my mistakes." Every success story here is quiet. Every failure makes the news. As of today, Red Alert, Indian Posse, Alberta Warriors, Boy Posse, and the Hells Angels Edmonton chapter all remain part of the city's story, but they're not the whole story. The real question isn't who runs Edmonton, it's who gets out and who helps them. Thanks for watching. Make sure to follow Canadian Crime Files for future videos.